So first of all, we understand now what is the body language of the dog, like what's the dog trying to signal. And then we look at the problem that we have and we try to understand, why is my dog doing that? So actually, communication in dogs is always aimed at reducing tension. So if two strangers meet, if your dog meets another dog, they're always trying to, and that's what all these calming signals are about, is to reduce tension. And they don't fight very often. They do a lot of like play fighting, which is normal behavior for dogs. It's where they are like they're like maybe running around. They might be like grabbing the fur of the other dog. I'm sure you've seen this behavior, like when you go to the dog park, the dogs are playing. They're jumping up on each other, and they might pull on each other's fur and stuff, but they're not like maybe pull on the tail of the other dog or something when they're like really happy playing. But that's not a fight, a real fight. They're just playing. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the dominance myth. I think probably the people who are present here know about this and are not so much into that. But actually, in reality, real fights, and not just between dogs, but with animals in general, a lot of animal behavior is centered around reducing tension and like deciding who wins what, like territory or mates or whatever. Just using like the body language, like showing off rather than actual fighting. Because anytime a wild animal is injured, there's a risk of infection. So, when an animal has an infection, it can be lethal. So that's a big deal, and they're always trying to avoid that. So it's not true what people used to say, that your dog is always trying to win and trying to dominate over everyone else in the household. They're not trying to do that. They're just trying to live their life and be happy like the rest of us. So what I see is that the most common reasons for the dog misbehaving is fear, anxiety, and boredom. So these are actually the most common reasons. It's not dogs being, oh, my dogs are being like cheeky, or they don't listen, or like they have bananas in their ears, they don't respect me, or whatever. That's usually not the reason, I find, when you dive into the cases. So I wanted to also explain here the difference between fear and anxiety. So fear is a fear of a thing or an event. So for example, a dog is afraid of men. So when the dog sees a man, he becomes scared. So he might show some type of fear, like the tail tucked between his legs, shackles raised, barking, things like that. And when the person that they are afraid of, the trigger, as we call it, goes away, the fear goes away. So it's not then the behavior changes. And but anxiety comes from thinking of the trigger when you can't see it. So if the dog is quite often, like if a dog who is afraid of men lives somewhere where men come quite often, and some of them might be conceived by the dog as being aggressive, they start to become afraid even when men are not there, because they're afraid a man might come. And that is anxiety. So it's like a constant state of mind. And that makes it in many ways more difficult for the dog to, or it's just really contributes in a negative way to the dog's quality of life. And this is very common, especially with rescue dogs that have had some bad experiences and they've become anxious. Sometimes there is an event that triggers the anxiety. For example, if a dog has separation anxiety, they see the owner putting on their shoes, taking the keys and the jacket and getting ready to leave. And then the fear starts to build up in the dog, even when the owner is still there, like before the owner leaves. So, all right. So what is a dog? Dogs are, they came from wolves. We all know that. They're originally very related, genetically very related to wolves. Wolves became domesticated a really, really long time ago. And they started as scavengers around humans, and then people actually started breeding dogs thousands of years ago. So they started having like different breeds for like hunting, companionship, etc. But they didn't have like all the different breeds that we have now. But there was like types that had started to form already back then. So a dog is not a wolf. Even though dogs can mate with wolves, it's not the same species because of they're so different. And a lot of problems with dog training, I think, has come from like studies being done on wolves and then extrapolated directly onto dogs, first of all. And also, second of all, a very, very popular book that like started a lot of the myths was done not even on wild wolves, but on captive wolves. So they weren't even displaying, and they were captive and not in their pack, like normal wolf pack, but with groups of unrelated wolves, and they just display different behaviors than they would if they are in their normal environment. So there was a book published in the 70s, and it's been like retracted by the author now, and he's admitted that a lot of the things that he wrote about in his book don't apply to dogs. But anyway, it's difficult to go back when these myths are so popular and they just keep going around. But I think it's also important for us to understand the difference between humans and dogs. And this is related to the picture I was showing you earlier about the girl hugging the dog. So people are genetically related to apes. So, and apes are just different from dogs, from canines. We like to keep eye contact. So for example, when we are talking to each other, we like to look each other in the face. We have the eyes, we have like a flat face, and the eyes are in front of our face. So we face each other and we look at each other directly, and we like to keep eye contact, which is considered polite in our society. And we are always touching and hugging each other. This is just what we do as a species. Of course, I'm speaking in generalities here. It's not, of course, not every person likes touching and hugging, but in general, people are like, we're a social species. That's also one of the reasons that we like to have dogs around, because they are a social species that normally has small family groups, not so unlike us. But for dogs, a lot of this behavior is not like this hugging and touching all the time is not, it's not natural for them. So dogs that grow up with people, they're just used to being touched and hugged by people. So they don't oppose it normally, and they just accept that this is part of living with your human companions. So they don't usually struggle, and some even learn to like it. So there are some dogs who like hugging and seek out being in the arms of the owner. So, but in general, they are not huggers like we are. So if you have your, I think it's a really good exercise also just to think about like the signs of stress or anxiety or fear that you have seen in your dog's behavior. with rescue dog parents, people usually are aware that their dogs are showing some signs of fear and stress. So normally I would also, like in my content, like I go and dive much deeper into all the behavior and the calming signals and the stress signals than what we have time for today. So it's a good idea to like write down a few things that you've seen.